Hello Idle Hero fans, thanks for tuning in today, as I'm going to be discussing why I believe Groo does not need a nerf, as this has been a narrative pushed by Floofy for the past little while, simply based on the fact that his guild cannot deal with Zell's team that has Groos on them as a defensive stats, and I personally believe that this is just the result of him not being able to recruit Zell. As it turns out, spamming certain people does not actually work. When it comes to recruitment, you actually have to have a decent argument for why you're trying to recruit people and not just relentlessly spam over and over again. However, in order to actually defend the point, I'm not going to just use these kinds of anecdotal situations that I believe are the case. I will, however, deconstruct his arguments one by one so that we can actually have a rational discussion about this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cite the Reddit article that he has posted. I'll link that in the discussion below. I'll put it in the comments and I'll pin it so everyone can see it for themselves. So let's go over the first topic that he brings up, and that is that the results for Groo speak for themselves. He mentions that there are a bunch of matches where Zell has not lost a match, and therefore that constitutes the fact that Groo should be nerfed just because Groo is successful. Now, obviously, if you look at this at face value, that sounds pretty good. You know, if Groo is always winning, then of course Groo is too strong. However, the sentiment that results always speak for themselves is kind of ridiculous because you can make results the way you want them. For example, let's go look at the guild wars that we're currently in right now. The last match that we fought against this haha guild, if this will ever load. Oop, there we go, took a little while. But you can see this here Asian player, I'm probably going to butcher this name, Cho Ben Song. He has beaten us in 3 matches in a row in a similar way that you would see the Groo team winning. And he beat 3 pretty good teams. Like, the first one was obviously a little destroyed from the last match, so that one you could almost write off. But he beat 2 teams in a row convincingly. 2 very good teams as well. These are top tier players who got beaten by this player here. And the only outlier we can see for this team is that he has Valentino. So by this logic, we could now say, well, Valentino is also too strong and now needs to be nerfed. But of course, that's not the way data works. This is a cherry-picked result, as is any situation where you're trying to prove a point like that and you're using very specific data. The only one who would have the data you would need to do something like this in an effective manner would be Meh, and I don't think he comes out with this kind of stuff very often, if at all. So I don't think this is an effective way to relay your point, because you can do this any way you want. You can make data say what you want it to. You can take polls and make polls say what you want it to. So you have to be careful when you're looking at specific evidence like this, because it doesn't always paint a full picture. And in order to contrast that, I actually have a few examples here. I'll get out of this, where we can look and we can see that the Groo teams are definitely beatable. And there's one guy in specific, I'll bring up the chart here, again, that has, this guy beats Zell all the time. And he runs Valkyrie, Emily, Lutz, Heartwatcher, Cruz, and Mim. And he uses the subduction pet. Now, when you look at this, the actual only factor here that's making a big difference is the Heartwatcher. And that's what simply this comes down to, is you really need a hero on your team that can actually amplify damage. And the current meta just doesn't fit that. So that's the problem here, is that we're looking at someone's point of view that says that this meta does not work against Zell's team. But is that really a good reason to nerf a hero, or to gut a hero, is what he's trying to do. He's not even trying to nerf it, he's trying to make it so that it's pretty much not relevant in PvP. And the problem with that is there is an answer. And the things that this answer causes is it will force your team to run different types of strategies, which I think is optimal. We're going to have to move on to a scenario where not only will you be able to run GVE teams anymore, your guild will actually have to diversify a little bit as more teams like this come into fruition. Because Groo right now is not the only hero that can take advantage of stuff like this. Sleepless right now is a hidden gem that people are just not using, and Sleepless may even be stronger than Groo, because Sleepless actually does damage. Sleepless can actually fight back, so you can have him in an offensive team as well. And that is one point that's kind of getting pushed here, is that Zell's team is actually garbage at attacking. This team cannot attack. It will never win an attack formation pretty much at all. Unless one of the Vessas goes crazy, this team doesn't win when attacking. So this is a very defensive team that can only be used in one specific niche and has a counter and will cause the Guild Wars and PvP, by extension, aid to diversify, which is what we need. This is a game where it has been blocked by very simplistic teams that everyone makes the same copy of, and this kind of stuff will help break that apart. And that's what we need. And not only that, but on the odd chance, there are situations like the one that you see here where Zell can actually lose to more traditional GVE teams as well. Now, I will admit this happens less than the other guy. If you have Heartwatcher in your team, for example, you can do much better results. But this kind of team still can beat Zell. So not only will this cause a diversification, but even with the standard teams, he can still lose. So we're not talking about a team that actually causes a serious problem fundamentally in the game. Let's go over his second point. I already covered his third point about counters because I think that's what I just addressed. But his second point is that this team isn't even complete and that this will become worse with Groos, with more Groos. If this team has all Groos, then this point gets worse. I think that's actually not the case, especially if you look at the counters presented. Counters are a specific way to deal with one hero, and when you look at someone like Groo, if you have 6 of them, a team with a Heartwatcher is just going to rip that apart. You're not going to have any trouble. And this is all theoretical as well, on both sides, from my point and from his point. So it's hard to really say how this is going to work out. I'm pretty sure that it won't be a problem as long as people start to diversify their teams. But if you just look at it from what it is right now and what we have the data of right now, this really isn't as big of a deal as we're making it out to be. And his last point that really makes any difference is that Groo is not a very rare hero, and I don't think that's even something you really should consider, because there are a ton of stuff like that. Hero's rarity is somewhat indicative of how strong it is, but it's so wild on the spectrum of like a strong hero can be rare, not rare. It's kind of all over the place. Like right now, Lutz is a very valuable hero for dealing with those scary or scurry teams, and Lutz is super common. So I don't think this is really something we can even consider when looking at whether or not a hero is strong or not. I think ultimately what we have to look at is what it does to the game, and once we have enough data to actually make a sizable evaluation, we can then look at if a hero is too strong, too weak, or if it needs to be nerfed or banned or buffed or whatever the case may be. But as of right now, Groo is not overpowered. He is counterable, just not with the current meta. So what we need to do is we need players to start diversifying and not just relying on the same strategies they've used for the past 5 or 6 months. That's it. We don't need to nerf Groo, especially not in the way that he is recommending. If you do want to nerf him, it has to be small. That's probably the biggest thing here, is that when nerfing and buffing heroes, you should always do that in small increments at a time so you can see the scale back. You don't want to make huge shifts that will change someone's team from being really meta relevant or really strong to absolute garbage in one instance. That's such a terrible way to balance the game, and that's what we're looking at right here when we look at the proposals by Floofy. So let me know what you guys think about this and how you feel about Groo in the current meta. This might be a little bit of a polarizing opinion, and I'll be the first one to state here that, of course, I'm a little bit biased because he is in our guild. However, I would like you to consider that for Floofy as well, because he was all fine with this until Zell refused to join his guild, and now that Zell is not in his guild and he's in our guild, all of a sudden this is a big issue. So consider that when making an opinion about all this, and as always, guys, thanks for watching.